All right, five. It's counting down five, and I'll just go into it. What is up, fight fans, and welcome to a special live edition of Sportsnaut Scrap Report. I am, of course, Jason Burgos, and with me, as always, is a candidate, as you can see with his hat, for LA Player Hater MVP for the year 2023, and that is the one, the only Anthony Walker, Senior ABW. How are you feeling for this special live edition of the Scrap Report?
I'm feeling particularly hateful today, Jason.
Hmm.
I like that the hate is flowing through me, but I do feel disrespected every time we do one of these shows. You introduce me as a candidate, as a potential, as I am the goat when it comes to hating. So let's get the facts straight, bro.
I mean, there's some serious haters in there. If anybody's been paying attention to Washington lately, there's a lot of elite level haters in Washington. So that's why I gave you credit for candidate for this year for the LA district of hating, and that's a big district.
Can I just be like the people's hater, like I'm the people's champ among haters? I'll take that.
That's fair.
Yeah,
I will give you that. We are
like the
the new
equivalent of an
people's hater.
underground mixtape MC
Yeah.
level
Okay.
hater. All right.
You're like the mad rapper for the new generation.
More like a papoose or something like that.
Okay.
Somebody who's
Fair enough.
nice. They recognize him. He's one of the best when it comes to lyrical sharpness, but he hasn't hit that mainstream level. So maybe I'm like a
I like it.
mainstream. Not I'm not the
I
mainstream level
like
hater
it.
just yet. I'm
Fair
working on it
enough.
though.
All right. We got a lot to talk about. We got UFC 294 this weekend during the day. Please, people, don't forget it's during the day. It's not during nighttime. So we got a lot to talk about. We want to talk a little bit UFC 294 first, but we'll get to picks for some of the big fights on that card on Saturday. But first, let's talk about, if you weren't paying attention, you were under a rock somewhere and you weren't paying attention to the fight game. UFC 294 at the top of the card had a lot of big changes. The main event of Islam Makhachev versus Charles Oliveira, a fight I was so excited to see, has been changed. Oliveira got a cut during training camp, during his practice and stuff like that. Out of the fight, in jumps Alexander Volkanovski, featherweight king. But not only there, we've already got a hint of it a couple weeks before it happened. But of course, Paulo Costa isn't going to be fighting Hamzat Chimaev in a co-main event. He got a staph infection. He had like multiple surgeries. Was acting like he was going to fight somehow with this thing. No. You're not going to fight Paulo. Instead, we're going to get Kamara Usman, a legend of the welterweight division. He's jumping in at middleweight to fight Hamza Chimaev. So, considering those two big changes, Anthony, did UFC 294 get a whole lot better with the addition of legitimately two top 10 pound for pound fighters on our Sportsnaut top 10 pound for pound and ringside top 10 pound for pound list? Or did maybe UFC 294 lose a little mainstream sizzle and especially some Brazilian appeal by losing Costa and Dubrovs?
I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. It gained mainstream sizzle, in my opinion,
Hmm.
but it lost some credibility. Although the fights might turn out better, whatever that can mean. Like it's some weird blend of them all. First off, for the main event, I do like the idea of seeing Islam and Volkanovski rematching. I just didn't want it to happen this soon. And with
Yeah.
when they have clear contenders in their divisions, I'm cool on the champ versus champ thing for a little bit. Like I feel like we just blinked our eyes and got that not that long ago. So
Mm.
I don't really need to see it again, although it was a great fight. For the co-main, the middleweight fight with Khamzat and Usman, that certainly gained a lot of mainstream appeal because Kamaru Usman is a much more solidified commodity over Apollo Costa.
Yeah.
But still, you're talking about a guy who's making his middleweight debut. At least in the UFC, I'm not sure if he's fought in middleweight outside of the UFC, but the first time UFC fans will get to see him fight at 185. And now this is supposed to be a title eliminator with someone else who hasn't exactly gone through a murderer's row of people at 185. So I'm just
Yeah.
it's lost a lot of credibility. Still probably going to be fun to watch though.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. I mean, it's I would kind of disagree with you a little bit on mainstream appeal, which is crazy because that's just how the UFC works. You would think adding a featherweight champion, one of the best welterweight champions of all time, that should add mainstream appeal. But I almost feel guys like Charles, because of their fight style, and a guy like Paul Costa because of his fight style, how he's able to push himself on social media, and the weird thing with like the juice bottle thing and all that kind of nonsense. I feel like they are more of a mainstream stars than elite stars, and that's sadly kind of how the UFC works in a weird way. You don't have to be the best to be the most famous and the most regarded and stuff like that. So I feel like in a certain way they lost a little sizzle. Costa versus Chimaev, they had heat. These dudes almost fought each other, almost came to blows at the Performance Center like a year or so ago. And then just Charles, like Charles versus Islam had a lot of interest as two of arguably they're the two probably best lightweights of this generation. They're two guys that can be in the discussion for two of the best lightweights ever with a BJ Penn and Habib Nurmagomedov. Not to say that this isn't still a worthwhile fight with Volkanovski, and it means a lot in terms of pound for pound value. But I really like that lightweight historical appeal, because if Alexander beats him, okay, maybe he's a legend of two divisions, but we're not sure. I don't know. And if he loses, he lost a second time. He's on short notice. He's got to build. Some of that appeal is gone for me, but nevertheless, it's still a really good, two really good fights. They didn't lose anything with either fight.
No, they're going to be good fights regardless. But I do think with Charles Oliveira and Makhachev, it's hard to ignore the fact that we just saw that and it wasn't close. It wasn't remotely competitive. So we can't erase that, even though Oliveira deserves the rematch. He earned the rematch. Like, he is the most deserving person at lightweight to get that shot. So it makes sense that he was there from a meritocracy standpoint, but it doesn't have the sizzle to me just because we saw how that goes down. Maybe it plays out differently, but obviously we won't know Saturday because we don't know when this fight, if ever, it will be put back together. But I do think that this is one of those times where credibility doesn't align with what might be more entertaining or just more exciting for the mainstream. So
Yeah, I mean, I'm still looking forward to it either way. I'll probably watch it later after the fact. Got some stuff to do on Saturday, but we'll get back to it. A lot of good things to talk about with UFC 294. But before we get back to it, let's talk about some interesting topics in the sport of MMA. We didn't get to it last week. Let's talk about a little more this week. That's the big news with USADA being getting dumped by the UFC. Now, in place of USADA, we're going to get the drug-free sports organization, which they take over, and they're going to be handling and collecting samples, and they're going to be actually sending them out to a WADA testing lab, which I think might have been similar to what was going on with USADA, but a little bit less invasive. But because of that, maybe the less they're doing, the UFC also announced that George Piro, who is going to serve as an independent administrator, he's a retired FBI agent, which means he's probably a boy with Nowitzki, and he's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner, and he trains an American Top Team. So we're getting all kinds of hookups here in this job. I don't know if that means he's the right guy for the job or not. What are your thoughts on this? Because the whole story is that they really clashed heads, USADA and UFC, with getting Conor McGregor into the testing pool, and he's got to wait 6 months until he's ready and he's able to fight. They don't want to wait. Conor should really take a lot of heat with this, that he dragged his damn feet in terms of getting back in the pool. But what are your thoughts on it? Is it a bad thing for this relationship to end, as PFL is now starting a relationship with USADA? Did USADA maybe kind of fumble the bag, and maybe they should be a little bit more lenient? Maybe it doesn't need to be 6 months. Maybe 3 months would be better. I mean, they are the experts. And then just the overall Conor McGregor connections. What you wrote an article about it for Ringside. What are your thoughts?
Well, as far as Conor McGregor's connection to the whole thing, like, I wouldn't give him a lot of flack for this whole thing because he's doing what he's allowed to get away with, as anyone would
Yeah.
do. Like, if
Yeah.
you are allowed to do certain things, whether they're good or bad, you're probably going to do them, right? If they're advantageous to you. So
Yeah.
that's just human nature. So I don't expect him to be the one who acts above board when everyone else is letting him do whatever he feels like. Now, I do think that there are a lot of different layers to unpack. First off, let me just get this one off the chest right off rip. The fact that now drug free sport is running this whole thing, and George Piro, who, this retired FBI agent who's supposed to be exemplary reputation and all that, is a independent administrator, that means absolutely nothing to me. trying to flash the credentials of a man who was an FBI agent, like, and I'm supposed to trust this guy because he's an
so
FBI agent.
weird. Like, not a
I'm sorry.
scientist or a professor, a genius of chemistry. He's an
Yeah.
FBI agent.
Yeah, FBI
What?
agent. Like, okay, so he
So
carried a
he's gonna
gun and he
waterboard
locked
them if
people
they
up at some
lie.
point.
Like,
Like, I
yeah.
don't.
What
There
are
have
you
been a
doing?
lot of corrupt law enforcement people, and
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The FBI is not the most credible organization to me. Look at the history of COINTELPRO, and no, I'm sorry. FBI doesn't do
Yeah.
it for me.
Yeah.
And the fact that he trains at American Top Team, I get, like, most of the people that are going to work within this space have some connection to the mixed martial arts world and combat sports world in general. As we talked about before, it's a very small world. It doesn't take too many steps if you train at a real gym to come across certain people. It's just you might be 5 phone calls separated from a world champion, depending on where you
Yeah.
train at. That's just how
Yeah.
small this community is. So I'm not surprised by that, but there are multiple conflicts of interest by his presence, and the fact that he once held a badge doesn't take those away. It presents a lot of the same conflicts of interest that USADA presented. If the UFC is writing the check to the organization or writing the check to the independent administrator, there is a conflict of interest, because at the end of the day, you want your money. Um, and that's sort of the brick wall that USADA ran into. Now, for their statement on the scorched earth email that was sent out that announced that this partnership was coming to an end,
Mhm.
do I think it was about the integrity of the sport? No. Do I think it was about their efforts to clean up drug usage within the combat sports world? No. What I think was about the estimated $7 million a year that the UFC was giving to them. And if I'm remembering correctly, when I was researching that article, I think their total assets were somewhere around like 21 million. So that's a significant chunk of change to that
Yeah.
organization. Yeah, I might be pretty mad too if it was going away. Um,
Yeah.
and I think the writing's on the wall for drug-free sport and for George Piro and anyone else that they want to trot in front of us as now the moral authority in this whole thing. You guys are getting the check from them, and you saw what happened to the last group of people that decided they were going to buck the system. So get in line, fellas. That's the thing. You want to get paid, do what we say, and that's what this amounts to. I don't think that's the death blow to the sport. I don't think it's gonna, the sky isn't falling, because I think we need to have a much more nuanced approach about performance enhancing drugs in sports in general. And maybe this will push that conversation forward. It sounds like, according to Novinsky, and forget who the other gentleman that they had on stage when they were presenting the George Piro and this whole thing.
It was Hunter Campbell, right?
That was Hunter Campbell.
Yeah.
Okay. So when they're saying, when they're saying, like, well, they'll look into whether or not it makes sense for athletes to use this when they're recovering from injury. That's a good step. That's a good step to just do more research and figure things out and make a nuanced approach. And most importantly, and I can fault no one but the fighters in this one. The fighters need to have a say, like maybe an association or a union of sorts, because you're mad that USADA's knocking on your door at 6 a.m, waking you up when you're in training camp. Uriah Faber talking about USADA asking for a pee sample when his wife is giving birth to their first child. Just things like that. Like, if you have a group that is representing the fighters to collectively bargain, those things just don't happen. The NFL players are not complaining about drug tests
Yeah.
interrupting their sleep. I remember Dominic Cruz told a story. He apparently had a young lady in his place and was doing adult things with her, and a knock at the door, and he had to stop what he was doing to give a pee sample. Things like that. You don't hear the NFL or the NBA or the NHL or the MLB complaining about that, because players unions negotiate to make sure things like that don't happen.
Yeah.
So get it together, fighters.
Yeah, I think, not to go down the union rabbit hole, because I just think I've given up on it. I don't think it's going to happen. Like, if they can't help themselves, no one's going to help them. Like, the only way it's going to happen if, like, the Ali Act, someone steps in, the Ali Act got expanded for MMA. But, like, these fighters are just not going to do it, unfortunately. And it's because the UFC knows how to manipulate them and keeping them in line and
Yeah.
divide them and all this kind of stuff. It's just not gonna happen. So that, yeah, it's a weird thing. Like I did like that to find out that drug free sport is working with some of the bigger leagues and stuff like that. But you know what? For all the problems, for all those issues, and I get why fighters hate USADA and stuff like that. You know what? It made me at least always feel the sport was on the level, and it's always kind of been a thing with fight sports in general, especially UFC. UFC had to overcome a lot of hurdles to legitimacy in the sports game. And now it really is looked on as a legitimate level. It's covered by ESPN. It's covered by all these major networks. It's on ABC and stuff like that. It's among them. And that was it. And being a clean sport, because we all heard the dark age stories and what was going on in Pride and all those kinds of things that, for all the frustration, I feel for the fighters. But in the end, if they're doing their due diligence to make sure everybody's clean all the time and they're interrupting while they're doing a naughty thing, it sucks. But if it saves you from losing a fight because some dude was cheating and doesn't cost you millions of opportunities and money, I like that. I appreciate that. But I think you nailed it. And I talked to Randy Couture for Sportsnaut recently, and he kind of made the point too. Same thing. Like the fighters don't have a say, and if the fighters don't have a say, that's the weirdest thing. And who knows what the UFC is doing? They're framing a system around what they want and what best works for them. In the end, it's still better probably than other organizations. But I like that there was this sort of independent, reputable, strong brand in drug testing that was there to kind of not allow them to use their influence and like they can with the Nevada State Athletic Commission or the California State Athletic Commission. Like I appreciated that
It
being
worked
done.
until it didn't.
Yeah,
It worked.
yeah.
So sorry, Jason, I don't mean to step on your toes, but I couldn't let this one off in the article because I just didn't know how to word it while maintaining a level of professionalism here. So I'll attempt it while talking live without this anything being scripted. So we'll see how that goes for professionalism. But anyway, like USADA did show that they weren't the ironclad, moral arbitrators before with Brock Lesnar entering
That's
UFC
true.
200.
I feel like they learned from that. That happened,
they
got better from it.
Yeah, they got better to an extent. Like
because they weren't doing the 6-month thing even then, were they? I don't know.
They were. It was Brock Lesnar got a waiver to get in to get in back in the UFC, right?
Yeah.
So like we had Nate Diaz had to push back. It's like certain names were able to push the agenda, which is going to happen. The people with more money and more power are going to have more say and be able to affect change in the system, of course. But I think with Conor McGregor, it got to be ridiculous, right? To where they could not just look the other way. And granted, they did offer up like John Jones as a sacrificial lamb for UFC 200 and the aftermath of UFC 214 for some of his issues. But like with Conor, it's like this dude left the USADA pool like after he breaks his leg, before he's in a cast, he's gone from the USADA pool. Then he shows up on social media looking more and more like a strong man, looking more and more like, like a bodybuilder. And you see like his facial features distorting as this is going on, right? And he's delaying his entrance into the pool, and he's pretty much, I'm gonna fight at this point. And then Dana White's backing him up saying, yeah, who cares what USADA thinks? At some point, the organization that's supposed to hold up the standard, whether they cut some corners here and there and whether they look the other way certain times, there's a point where it's like, okay, we can't look the other way this time. Like now y'all really making us look crazy. And I think that's what happened. They look real crazy. They would look insane and would look like a complete joke if they decided to let Conor McGregor fight. And he was fighting on the last pay-per-view of the year after Dana got on stage talking about who cares what they think, after McGregor is showing up looking like Lou Ferrigno everywhere he goes. We got a problem. So
they had a standard. I respect that they had a standard, and now we don't have that standard anymore.
But it got to be ridiculous. It got to a point where it's like, this is insanity. Yeah. We can't just stand back. Like at least hold them back for that time. Like at least pretend to enter the pool, like something. And it didn't seem like the UFC or McGregor was willing to just play ball with them in order to keep the charade going. So
Yeah, for one man, I think everybody lost. I think the UFC lost, the USADA lost, I think the fighters lost, and I think that even the fans lost because you just don't know who's clean anymore. But please, if you're watching this wherever you're watching this, if you're gonna listen to it, watch it after the fact. Like, share, subscribe, comment. Let us know what you think of the conversation. What do you think on the USADA stuff? What do you think on the change to UFC 94? But let's talk about something. It's an interesting story that's kind of in the shadows, because of the promotion has really kind of receded and it isn't as prominent as it used to be, which is a damn shame because it used to be the number 2 in the game. But that's Bellator. Bellator has been a dark cloud hovering over because of rumors that it's going to be sold. And we talked about it for a while. I interviewed Ray Seffel about it with PFL. PFL is supposed to be a top contender to buy them. But we really kind of got confirmation that that's really going to happen. And there's really dark clouds on the horizon because that is this week. It was announced that Paramount Global is going to be shuttering Showtime Sports. Showtime Sports handles, of course, a lot of documentaries, all kinds of stuff, but they handle Showtime Boxing, which has been around for fucking 38 years now. Showtime Boxing and HBO Boxing are now both out of the fight game, and they handle Bellator. Bellator is a part of Showtime Sports, and that means Bellator doesn't have a place to be broadcast, and they're being sold. They're just in a terrible position. They just had Bellator 300 recently, good card, 3 title fights. We got Bellator 301 coming up, which features Amasov versus Jackson for the 170 title, great fight. Pettis versus Mix for the bantamweight titles, a great fight. And unfortunately, Pitbull versus Shabili in a lightweight Grand Prix, which that Grand Prix is probably not going to get finished now. But at least some other knots like the Jackson Amasov, these things are going to get tied up. Patchy Mix. It does seem like this is going to be the last card for Bellator. And at least it ends with a way where it kind of finishes the story on a lot of various things. But what are your thoughts? Is this the last Bellator 301, the end for Bellator?
I would think so. I mean, it doesn't seem like Paramount Global has any sort of dedication to keeping Bellator, just owning it still. And
Yeah.
then on top of that, just completely distancing itself from combat sports entertainment. So
Yeah.
like it's very important to know that CBS Sports, in according to the information we have so far, there are no plans to continue boxing broadcast on CBS Sports. They didn't even mention Bellator, like didn't mention it.
Yeah.
I would think if they were intending on keeping Bellator going, then that would say, hey, like, because Stephen Espinosa and Showtime Sports, whatever, they were essentially put in charge of a lot of things with Bellator very
Yeah.
recent, within like the last year and a half or something, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken.
Yeah.
You know, so that Espinosa has taken a huge role in Bellator, and to be laying off everyone from Showtime Sports, and then just not mentioning Bellator MMA, a product that they own, is that's directly affected by this whole thing, is very interesting. It shows a complete lack of commitment. I'm amazed that they did it that way too, because if they are intending on selling it instead of just shutting it and just releasing everybody, I mean, you kind of killed a lot of your bargaining power, right? Like
Yeah, right?
you've
Totally.
murdered your bargaining power. So
Yeah.
if this is a product that you no longer feel interested in broadcasting anymore, and the entity that it should be going to, if you're keeping it going, hasn't even mentioned a word about it, I mean, how much is it worth now?
Yeah.
That really kills the return that they're likely to get, unless there's a deal that's on the table and that's just
Yeah.
being secured now that we're not aware of, which very
Yeah.
possible.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, it's a moot point because it's not affecting negotiations are already over. But man, I almost think we would have gotten some word of that, like there would have been some leak about it or something, because this has been going on for months. Like I think it was like February or March or something, the rumors started, at least when I first remember hearing something about Bellator possibly being up for sale. And then June, I think it was, that Coker confirmed it, and some other people in the know were commenting on it. It doesn't I don't understand the strategy here, if it's still up for sale and hasn't already been sold and we just haven't heard about it.
Yeah, it really feels like kind of like some of the traditional business related things we've seen when it comes to news and mergers or purchases, stuff like that. Because yeah, it is very weird to not mention something that you own, you've been broadcasting on your networks for a long time, and stuff like that. Especially when there's this talks of sale, that might be. I think you nailed it in that it's probably already been sold. They're leaving it out because it's set up to be a part of a bigger announcement with something else. Maybe it's PFL, maybe it's UFC. But either way, yeah, it would be completely stupid negotiating tactics to say, yeah, we're not even going to broadcast this thing anymore. You still want it?
Yeah.
You know, it just it doesn't help the bargaining. But yeah, probably a
Yeah.
deal is done, and it's just a shame. What are you saying?
I'm sorry, Jason. One thing I forgot about, like, it was just January that Bellator made its, if I'm not mistaken, Bellator made its CBS debut in January. Right. I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
I was there.
yep,
Like I was there for that one. I was
yep,
covering that. Um, that's crazy. Like, it was on CBS in January, and
yeah.
fast forward 10 months down the line, and CBS has not mentioned a word. There's been no mention of CBS anywhere with Bellator going forward. Yeah, I think the writing's on the wall here.
Yeah, it's a shame too. And in the end, that's it. PFL has to, if it is PFL, which it most likely, especially now that they got the Saudi investment stuff like that, it makes the most sense. While it would be great for the industry to continue Bellator on some form and stuff like that, and have fighters and all the staff keep jobs, it doesn't make sense to do that. Even we saw a major merger with the UFC and WWE under TKO Group Holdings. Like, there was a good bit of layoffs then, because there's just
Mhm.
jobs that are it's just redundancies, and those are $2 billion super successful companies, not a company that's kind of in a rut and a tough spot, and a company on the rise. Like, PFL, it doesn't make sense for them to keep it around, unfortunately. That means a lot of staff that are cool people, developer people that are going to maybe lose jobs, have to switch over. A lot of fighters we're going to get some fun matchups. But yeah, it really does seem, especially with nothing else
Mhm.
scheduled on the for the rest of the
Yes.
year, it it's a bad sign. And then the deal ends in December. It's a sad sign. But moving on from that, I want to, and it kind of circles back to, honestly, to the USADA stuff, and that's that Myra Buena Silva, her big win against Holly Holm is overturned after she tested positive for ritalinic acid. Now, she's going to get a 4-month suspension retroactive to the fight, which was a few months back anyway, so it's not really going to affect too much. But she does have to, like, $11,000 fine. It's like a certain part of her fight purse, all these other kind of fees. Now, the funny thing is the PED is commonly used for treating HDHD, and she says she recently told MA5 she's been using it for years. Usually she stops a week or so before the fight, but this time it showed up. I mean, hopefully this is one of the things that changes what USADA being gone, and we get drug free, whatever. And I think you kind of mentioned a reference a little bit. It's like these stupid kind of positive tests that really have, like marijuana, like back in the day, like these dumb things that are really not really having a major effect on a fight and making a fighter a better fighter physically. Can we just stop this? Can we find
Yeah.
ways to work around this? And a good fighter doesn't lose a really meaningful and big fight for just ADHD drugs. Really, people.
Yeah, this is really stupid. I mean, I'm thinking back to when, was it Lyoto Machida that got suspended for an extended period of time because he took like a over the counter fat burner that isn't even that
Yeah,
effective. Like,
yeah,
this is really stupid things happen, and that shows, like, there's this huge disconnect between the reality of PEDs and the enforcement of the rules regarding them.
yeah.
They just,
Yep.
you know, I mean, I guess if you look at it in through a particular lens, yes, ADHD medication can be considered a performance
Yeah,
enhancing drug
it has
because
some
it enhances
element
your
that's
performance in
connected to
life that
another
you
one. Yeah, like
but
it's probably
at a
it's
certain
like an
point,
element or a substance that is similar
yeah,
to a
or
substance in
like
something.
the
Like, come on.
effect of it makes you train harder and stuff like that. But we got to
Yeah,
look at like the
come on,
human part of
man.
this, because
Yeah,
yes, they're fighters and they are, superior physically to the average person walking the street over, but they're still human beings, right, that have lives.
exactly. Yeah,
ADHD is something that bothers a lot of people. It affects a lot of people negatively, and they move through life differently. That it's
yeah,
even on your job applications. Like, you can be considered disabled if you have ADHD in a lot of places. So,
yeah,
like, to not allow someone to take medication for an actual medical condition that
yep.
doesn't, make them jab harder or kick faster, it's really stupid. It's really stupid. And I think the worst part about this whole thing is that somehow or another this is going to get Holly Holm another title shot.
Oh, fuck.
I'm telling you, man. I'm telling you, this is they're gonna be like, oh man, we can spin the block on Holly. Throw her in there. That's what's going to happen, man.
And it's just it's so annoying because I mean, it is like we have to. There has to be something. There has to be exceptions made. You can't. You shouldn't lose a fight for something like this. I think, especially when things like ADHD and ADD are just being diagnosed much more than ever. Like if a person is born with something and they're susceptible to depression and stuff like that, that's not fair, and that they have to deal with that while other people don't have to deal with that mental side, but that's just genetically setting them back. And they can there's medication they can take to help them at least train like a normal person, like the rest of the competitors and stuff like. But it has some ingredient that has it's like it's so dumb.
Yeah.
Please, drug-free sport, please be better than USADA and most of these and the athletic commissions. Be better. Be beyond this.
Nuance.
Yes.
Nuance.
Yes.
Like I understand if she's loaded to the gills with this stuff and it's like
Exactly.
Ritalin oozing out of her nose and stuff. Yes, that's probably going to affect your in cage performance. But if we're talking about just like a normal level of medication to just function like a normal human being, there's got to be some wiggle room there. There's got to be a certain threshold that's acceptable, and not just the presence of it altogether being deemed bad. Like this is silly. I can't believe that we're still having these sort of conversations.
Yeah, it's like the new level of marijuana. Like that was the thing back in the day, like the Diaz brothers getting popped and losing fights and getting old because they took weed because they're dealing
Yeah.
with the inner turmoil of growing up on the damn streets of Stockton their whole life, while some other person didn't have to do that and they got to go to a nice school and had a wrestling program. Like, be better, drug free, please.
Poor
But
Pat Healy, who had his career completely derailed after his
yeah,
biggest win because God forbid he smoked a joint.
yeah, crazy. Especially now we're in a culture where we know mental more aware of what people are dealing with internally than what they are dealing with physically. But all right, let's wrap it up. Let's go back now. We're gonna go back to UFC 294 talk. Please again, if you're watching this, wherever you're watching this, wherever you're listening to this, like, share, subscribe, comment, let us know. Future guests, please let us know your thoughts, your picks for UFC 294. So we're not going to go through the whole UFC 294. There's a bunch of shows that do that. We're not going to do. I just want to focus on 4 of the better fights. Of course, they're on the main card. That's why they're the main card, because they're some of the better fights. But so one of the first ones I want to talk about is Tim Elliott versus Muhammad Mokaev, which is a really good fight. 2 fighters that are both ranked in our top 10 for on Ringside and Sportsnaut.com. Mokaev is, I hope I'm saying his name right. I'm sorry, Muhammad, if I'm butchering it, but he's
I like the way you said it there, though. It sounds cool. Say it again.
No, I'm gonna say he's a minus 485 favorite, which is that's a hell of an odd for someone like going against someone like Tim Elliott, who's always a really hard out. Similar to like a Bobby Green, not in style, but it's never really easy to beat a guy like Tim Elliott more times than not, unless he makes a mistake or you catch with something. But Mokaev, Muhammad, sorry, he's 12-0. 4-0 in the UFC. He's got 3 of his wins in the UFC are by submission. This is a big one. This is a big fight. This is the ultimate ranked gatekeeper kind of test for him. Is he the next big thing in the flyweight division?
I think it's possible. I'm not quite sure because his level of opposition has not been the absolute elite in the division, but man, he's checked all the boxes, right?
Yeah.
He's definitely checked all the boxes. I think he passed the test. Now, I don't think it's going to be with flying colors. I don't think it's going to be he's going to walk away with an A+ here. Tim Elliott is about as live of a dog as you ever could run across at flyweight. I mean, keep in mind, like he gave DJ a run for his money in the beginning of their fight, and that was a fight he should have been absolutely slaughtered in. Right? He won his fight against DJ for a title shot through the Ultimate Fighter. Like, I mean, do I even need to say it? The Ultimate Fighter was what got him the title shot.
Yeah.
He should have been railroaded, but he wasn't. Like, he put a good showing for himself, had DJ in trouble. I think it was in the first or second round. I think he gets Muhammad in some compromising positions, but Muhammad being younger, having a lot more tread on the tires, I think he at the end of the day pulls off a decision here.
Yeah, I mean, Tim's got 32 fights on his career. He's 36. He'll be 37 in a couple months. He's been in the game all the way since going back to his exhibition career, it's no, that's 2009. Like this guy who's been in the game for over a decade, a lot of wear and tear. But yeah, it's he's gonna put him in some tough spot. He's gonna push this kid, and he's gonna test him to see how good he is, especially on a standing. Because this guy, he's really good. Punisher's really good in terms of getting takedowns, the grappling. So is Tim. So I'm very fascinated to see how he does, and if he really can prove that he really can break through into like maybe the top five of the flyweight division. It's always definitely a need for new blood at flyweight, because it's kind of getting thin at the top a little bit. We've seen a lot of Brandon Moreno, but he's kind of out of the picture now. Maybe Brandon Royval should be interesting what happens with him and his title shot, but definitely a fight to look forward to. Keep your eyes on that, folks. Next one, Magomed Ankalaev versus Johnny Walker. This is a fascinating one. Ankalaev is a big favorite in this one too. Unsurprising, the dude's nasty. The dude's 9-1-1 in the UFC. But Johnny Walker is finally on another roll. He's had these kind of runs like, oh, he's finally gonna reach his potential. He's gonna be that guy. He's gonna be the superstar that we all thought when he comes in and does the flying ish and all that kind of stuff. He's on another 3-fight win streak. Been a while. Got some big wins. Anthony Smith, Paul Craig, Ian Katalaba, Olga wins. But has he evolved enough? Has his world tour of traveling and going to all these different camps, has he done enough that he can finally beat a guy like Magomed Ankalaev on the biggest stage in a fight that maybe puts him in a title picture for early next year?
I don't think so. I think
Yeah,
Ankalaev is too tough of a mountain to climb,
yes.
man. I think
Yeah.
that's really tough. Now, I will say this: the Johnny Walker that we have today is much more prepared for a fight like this.
Yeah, I agree.
And because I don't think we're going to see a return to flying knee, backflipping crazy Johnny Walker, to where his
Hopefully.
whole goal was simply to just entertain the crowd and
Yeah.
dance and blow out a shoulder or whatever in the middle of a celebration. I
Yeah.
don't think that guy exists anymore. Like, since he's gone to train with SBG, I mean, he's gotten a lot of flack for not being as entertaining, but he's been much more effective, and that's very important. The problem is, like, every area that he's more effective in, Ankalaev is just better. It's just better, and he's
Yeah.
just a fundamentally much more sound fighter.
Yes.
It just doesn't seem like something that Johnny Walker, in whatever iteration there is going to be able to do that, outside of something crazy happening, outside of getting caught with something, that same risk that every fight poses. No, this Ankalaev gets this one all day, I think.
Yeah, because just Ankalaev, he can grapple like most of these Russians from that region can do, but he can thump, man. He can hit hard. He's very, like you nailed it, fundamentally sound. He isn't throwing out there a lot of mistakes. He's not throwing wild stuff out there, and that maybe kind of separates him from being a really an elite superstar. He doesn't have those special it factor kind of things. That said, I agree. I'm not expecting Johnny to win this fight, but this is the best version of Johnny Walker we've seen. This is the one that you want to see in a big fight that has a lot of implications on it, and there's no denying 21 wins, 16 by knockout. I mean, 76% of his wins are by knockout. Like, if he gets them, he definitely can get them. Probably would be early, but if it hits the second, third round, I mean, he's not going to win this fight, but if he can do it, he's going to do it early. I don't think he will, but it should still be a fascinating fight. And if he can, man, he's finally here. We've seen it. We've heard. We talked about it so long. If Johnny Walker can beat a guy like that, he's finally here. And then all of a sudden, fights with Alex Pereira, excuse me, or Yuri Prohaska later in the year with Johnny Walker. If he that's gets real fun, real interesting. But we'll see what happens on Saturday. Moving on to the co-main event. This is the fight I'm most excited for. I know the main event's cool. It's a good fight, but I'm sorry. I'm on the Hazmat train. I'm all on the Hamzat train. I'm all on it. I'm on the Boers train. When I first saw this match, and he's gonna fight Kamaru Usman, I was like, oh no, this is probably a bridge too far. This is a tough matchup, but interesting. Going into the fight, -2 at the start of the week, -270 favor for Hamza Chimaev with just his 12 fights against a guy that is in the conversation as good as George St. Pierre at welterweight. That's shocking. But when you look at the things, I really feel if you're gonna have a fight, this is the time to get Kamaru Usman. I mean, if Hamza would have fought Kamaru Usman 3 years ago, forget it. No way. It would have been reversed. He would have been a plus 270 underdog. But Kamara at 36, there's no denying the wear and tear. He's been in the game a long time, had a lot of fights. I mean, look at this. He's got 10 decisions on his record. And a lot of those decisions are 5-round fights, a lot of wear and tear in his body. Now, he's lost 2 in a row. I'm not going to sleep on him. He's very talented, and Hamza is going to have trouble wrestling him. But I just feel like just Hamza's just one of those guys. This is the next big guy. Him, Sean O'Malley, they're the next guys. And I think the next guys win in these moments. He's catching Kamara at the right time where Kamara's on the downside of his grid. It happens. He's getting older. He can't be great for so long. We talked about it a couple weeks ago. Izzy's and that this is changing the guard time. And I just think there's going to be a change in guard. It's going to be tough. That first round's going to be trouble. The more he can keep it on the feet, the worse it's going to be for Hamza. But I just think that man is a monster. He's so strong. He's so fast. He's so young. He's so much bigger. Kamara's going up to a higher weight. He was an elite guy at welterweight. Just because he's going up and he's not cutting weight doesn't mean he's going to be better. We're talking to Randy Couture. Sometimes going up, he mentioned to me going up to heavyweight, he felt the weight. He was easy to be moved around, and the momentum was different when you have more weight in your body. So I'm going to pick Hamza. I'm going to pick some decision in this fight. Anthony, are you on the Boers train, Anthony?
I'm not on the Boers train, but I think he gets it.
Damn it, Anthony!
But I'm picking him to win.
On. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. I'm picking him to win. Like, I think that if we're talking about Usman with like a full camp, we might have a different scenario.
Too. Yep. Short notice.
The fact that this is short notice. Also, we're not sure exactly what he's going to look like coming off of these 2 losses, like how his confidence is affected, how physically he might be. Sorry, my daughter just opened the door and just started yelling.
She's going for Boris too. She's all on the Boris.
Yeah, she agrees with the pick. Like, I think, I think that like we have to look at the avenues that Kamaru Usman would have to win, right? Say this was just a welterweight fight and he's just fighting anyone that he normally would fight in that division. All right, his wrestling is always like a key thing with him, right? Well, Leon Edwards did a great job at stuffing those takedowns in their last fight, like, and just little subtle adjustments. And someone who's physically like smaller as far as like density, like he's not as like a muscular and just wide person like Usman. Like Edwards was easily stuffing those takedowns in their third fight. On the striking end, like Khamzat is not a slouch. Like, he is not a slouch at all. He's not a technician necessarily.
Yeah, he's not as polished as Kamar,
but he hits very hard.
He showed against Gilbert. He's a gamer.
Yeah, he hits very hard. He's not afraid of throwing down, and he doesn't take a lot of dumb chances either. He doesn't open himself up a lot. I think
he did against Gilbert. I think he'll learn from that.
Well, yeah, Gilbert Burns though is sort of that guy to. Gilbert Burns brings that out of people. I believe he. And that was a big test at that point. And also, you're talking about him cutting down to 170, and they are. Yep. This is going to be a different dynamic. This is going to be a much smaller person trying to do all this stuff to him. While he's allowed to just stay filled in and muscular and be his whole physical self. I don't think this goes well for Usman. I think you're right on a first round being a challenge, but I think after that it's going to be rough, man. It's going to be really rough.
Yeah, I think we're going to be surprised on how he's able to kind of manhandle him. And there's nothing against Kamara. Just this is a hell of a wrestler, super talented, and he just. I remember in one of my first lessons from one of my closest friends early when I started watching MMA, and he wanted to explain to me why Brock Lesnar would be able to be successful. When you have a big, strong, a good big man and a good small man, it's the good big man's going to win. And he's a good big man who's maybe just as fast as Kamara at this point in his career, stronger, amazing wrestler. I'm excited though. If Kamara wins, man, what a story. And that's kind of the follow-up question for whoever wins this fight, because it's not a Kamara is a live underdog, I think, in this thing, and I can see this being a thing. He forces a stand-up game and maybe picks Khamzat off on the feet and really works more. I would not be surprised by that. Kamara is that great a fighter. For whoever wins this fight, Kamara already has a win over Sean Strickland. Who's got a better chance against Sean Strickland? Who matches up better, or both of them maybe tough matchups with Sean Strickland, or maybe not?
I think they're both tough matchups for him. We saw Usman already beat Sean Strickland, right? And that was that was not the evolved version of Usman that we
Yeah.
have now, that can
Yep.
hang with him on the feet and doesn't
Yeah.
necessarily have to just rush in for the takedown the whole time and hold him down like this. A much more
Yeah.
well-rounded fighter now. And Khamzat, man, he's not going to watch Sean Strickland the way
Yeah.
Adesanya did. He's not going to stand there and watch him.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
that's a guy who's going to be more aggressive, who's going to take more chances, and has his own wrestling threat to present.
Yeah.
So I think they both have a very good chance against Sean Strickland. I do think too, man. I mean, if this actually ends up being a number one contender fight, I know we hear number one contender fight a lot and kind of doesn't
Yeah.
always mean anything
Yeah.
anymore. But I do think, man, that this dude, if Khamzat is in front of Strickland, I think he could do some serious damage on him, man. I think he can do some serious damage on him, because it's going to be a totally different thing.
Yeah.
If you Usman on, you win this, dude, cash out. This is his opportunity to really set himself up for a beautiful retirement. If Usman can get this win and he turns that into a title shot against Sean Strickland, and if he's able to get that win, oh my Lord, it doesn't even matter what happens to him after that. Legacy is super solidified, paycheck super solidified. That's the move, man. If you're Usman, I would like to see him win just to see that happen.
Yeah, and it really puts him. I mean, you can maybe make that case if he does this, he maybe surpasses George. In the end, George never lost. George went to middleweight and did the same damn thing. But I'm sorry, if he beats Sean Strickland's better than Michael Bisping. No disrespect, Michael Bisping is one eye.
You sure? You sure about that?
One eye Michael Bisping, I think he's definitely, because my one eye Michael Bisping, I thought lost to Dan Henderson, almost lost to Dan Henderson in that second fight for the title. I thought he lost to Anderson, and then he lost to George. And then he beat a dumb Luke Rockhold.
Luke
I think
Rockhold
Sean Strickland beat Israel Adesanya. Who else is Sean Strickland? I mean, Sean Strickland beat much better people than Michael Bisping. I'm sorry.
You sure?
I'm sure.
You sure about that?
I'm sure.
We'll have to talk a little more off air, because I'm not prepared to have this long conversation, because I have other things I need to do. But we're just not going to slander Michael Bisping like that, okay?
Yeah.
No.
Moving on. Co-main event. We'll get to that afterwards. I mean, not co-main event. Main event. Islam Makhachev, Alexander Volkanovski. Highly competitive fight. The first time. Both of them showed a lot in that fight. Both of them showed, especially Islam. Islam showed, we all knew Alexander Volkanovski was pound for pound best, especially after Kamaru lost and Izzy lost. But we didn't realize how good Islam really was. We thought he was the second coming of Khabib. Honestly, for what he's shown, I think he's probably much more well-rounded. Maybe Khabib's a better wrestler, but he's more well-rounded. And to go against Alexander Volkanovski, stand up, hold his own, super impressive. But also, Alex was fantastic in dealing with this guy's wrestling, keeping it on the feet. Fascinating rematch. What does Islam have to do? Because it's always said that it can be tougher for the person that won the fight in the second fight. Because how do you change something that won? But considering it was so close, maybe there are clear things Islam has to do the second time around that he can do better. First, what does Islam have to do to win this fight?
Oh man, I guess he has to respect the fact that Volkanovski can put hands on him, and respect the fact that Volkanovski can more than hang with him on the ground. And I think he took that for granted. You know, to see a guy coming up in weight when he's been able to just manhandle bigger lightweights than him, and then to have a guy coming up from 145 out grapple him at points and get better positioning on him and stuff takedowns and take him down, probably a shock to his system. So I think he comes in much more prepared for like a real true wrestling engagement, and not sort of planning to fight this sort of like awkward kickboxer. So that, I think that's what it is. And on the same note, like Volkanovski now respects the fact that Makhachev can throw hands on him, that Makhachev can hit him. And you know, so now their whole dynamic is just all mixed up. And quite frankly, I have no idea what we're going to get, because we could see them approach the fight in the exact same way with less caution. I think that's probably the more possible thing, especially from Volkanovski, that they're like, okay, I felt his power. I didn't quite get hurt. Like I wasn't stunned at any point. Okay, let me just take it to him. But then Makachev could just be like, hey, this guy is able to take it to me, but maybe I should play a little more defensively sound. Maybe I should maybe I should goad him out to counter. Like there are so many different angles of this. Like I wouldn't even want to begin to sort of break down the X's and O's on this, because it'd just be an infinite chess match that fortunately we get to see within a few days. But off the top of my head, I'll go right back to what we just said. The skilled bigger man typically beats the skilled smaller man. So I think that principle eventually will still reign true.
I'm gonna go bold, and I'm gonna say Islam gets the finish. He's from a very good camp. We cannot sleep on this camp. This is a camp that developed Daniel Cormier, took Luke Rockhold to a title, took Cain Velasquez to a title. Without a doubt, these are talented fighters, and maybe at a different camp they would have won a title. But took all these fighters, along with Habib, took Islam. Like all these champions come from that one camp, along with a lot of good fighters. I think they're gonna definitely come. And with what you said, he slept on some of the skills of Alexander in the first fight, and I think he's definitely gonna come with a better, smarter, more going to the word on you saw nuanced game plan. Nothing against Alex, but he's a bit behind the eight ball a little bit, coming in on short notice. I know he knows the game plan, but who knows what truly the shape he really is in. I'm sure he's a guy that trains all the time, but just different when you're training for training and training in camp. I'm going to boldly say I think he's going to get the finish. I'm going to go with maybe a third round submission. He's going to get him in a position. He's going to sub him, and I'm going to go with that. Do you think he'll get a finish, or he's going to go to decision again?
I'm leaning toward decision just because Volkanovski is just super tough. I mean, that is a knucklehead to the truest extent. So it's probably going to be difficult to get him out of there. But I didn't even think about I should have thought first thing about the short notice factor and fitness being a concern, because especially if you're going up in weight. You know, my knock on a lot of the guys that move up in weight is like, don't go and do it to be a tourist. Like you have to take the time to put the appropriate type of weight on. It's not okay, now I'm gonna eat donuts while I'm in camp. It's got to be like, hey, I'm on this strength training regimen. I'm powerlifting. I'm watching my macros. I'm doing things a particular way to gain the appropriate weight in the right time frame. And Volkanovski certainly just didn't have the time to do that. So he's probably got a lot of junk weight on him right now, that is going to stay simply because he has to make 155 as opposed to 145. I don't think that bodes very well. So with that in mind, maybe we do see a finish late though. Yeah, fourth.
All right, wherever you watch us, please, as always, like, share, subscribe. Let us know what your thoughts are, all these kinds of things. That is it for this edition of the Scrap Report. We'll be back again with a new edition where we're going to talk about all the fallout from this wild card and what's coming up next. Because in next month, big card, Matt Stewart coming up too. But for me, Jason Burgos, he is the player here to candidate for MVP of 2023. Anthony Walker. Until next time, everybody. Bye-bye.